Good evening, ladies as well as gentlemen. I'm Papa Boris, and in this video I'm going to explain to you how the crafting system in Tales from Candlekeep Tomb of Annihilation works. The crafting system in this game is complicated, inconsistent, and best of all, completely undocumented, so it can be a little bit frustrating when you get into the game, because there's the system, and pretty much nothing is explained about what it does or how it works. So hopefully this video will fill you in on that. When you start a game, you can click on one of these anvil pictures next to a hero to open up the crafting menu. And from here, do some crafting, potentially. Each character can craft 4 different items. A main weapon, a secondary weapon, an armor, and an accessory. And at the beginning of the game, you start with none of these, and you also have no ability to make any of them until you've beaten at least a few missions. So, main weapons, secondary weapons, and armors all do the same thing for everybody. What a main weapon does is give a bonus to your attack rolls and damage rolls for your at-will powers. So like, for example, right now, if we look at our ranger friend, Artis, right, and we take a look at his careful shot, you see that his attack value is +10, and the damage is 1. If you buy the worst one of the primary weapons, then your attack bonus will become +11, and your damage will become 2. If you buy the best, legendary primary weapon, then the attack bonus will be a whopping +15, and the damage will be a whopping 6, but it's going to be a really long time before you can do that. And it works pretty straightforwardly, where each of these pieces of equipment has a common, uncommon, rare, very rare, and legendary version, which are obviously increasingly difficult to make and improve at a linear scale. So for everybody, main weapons work exactly the same way. You got the common one that's +1, and then it increases by 1 all the way up to legendary at +5. Do note that these things do not stack. So if you've already got the copper dagger and then you make the dark blade for the ranger, then your total bonus will be +2. It's not going to be +3. Secondary weapons do the same thing as primary weapons, except they boost your daily powers. So they increase the attack rolls and damage rolls of daily powers. And you don't need to be a genius to realize that this is a far, far, far lower priority on the totem pole than the main weapon, because you're going to use your at-wills way more often than you use your dailies. And that's one of the, I think, problems with this game's crafting system, is that when you upgrade your main weapons, it makes at-will powers basically as good as dailies. So it really removes a lot of the impact and the fun that daily powers bring when they aren't actually that much better than the powers that you're using all of the time. Armors, for all the characters, improve their armor class and hit points by 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, depending on which tier of item it is. And the accessories, those are different. So for the ranger, accessories increase his speed, which is kind of nice. For the bard, accessories increase gold, and this is not documented, so I don't know what this actually means. I don't know if this affects gold that you find during the scenario from treasure cards. I don't know if this affects the gold that you get as a reward for beating scenarios. I have no idea, but supposedly and allegedly, I can't confirm it, it increases your gold gain once you increase one of these items. You do need to do a little bit of math to figure out, like, well, how much gold do I actually have to make to get my money back? And the answer is a friggin' hell of a lot. So the common items always cost some common crafting ingredients and 750 gold. When you're getting a 10% bonus, that means you have to get 7,500 gold before you get your money back. And this actually gets worse. It gets less efficient as you go on. So for example, you have to get 10,000 gold up from 7,500 to get back the money that you spend on the uncommon version. So it's a very long-term investment, but okay to do if you've got, gold sitting around and some, crafting material that you don't really care about. And then for the wizard and the paladin, the accessories are actually the same. They improve their utility powers. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, Boris, what the hell does it mean to improve the utility powers? Because utility powers, unlike the attack powers, aren't necessarily things that can just, like, improve by +1 or +2 or whatever. I'm going to go in and explain every single one of the utility powers and how they're affected by the items. I'm also going to explain how some of the daily powers are affected by these secondary weapons, because there are some daily powers that are, shall we say, non-standard, and it's not just a matter of boosting their attack and damage rolls. So I'll explain all of that in just a moment. What I want to mention now is the question of whether you should save your resources and try to jump over the early ones, or buy everything up as you go. So one thing that I question in the designer's decision making is that they made it so that common items are crafted entirely with common ingredients, uncommon items are crafted entirely with uncommon ingredients, and so on. What this means is that eventually you're just going to have gobs and gobs and gobs of common ingredients lying around and nothing to do with them. You can't transmute them into better ingredients, and you can't sell them for gold. They just sit there in your inventory. So the only long-term cost of making a common item before you make an uncommon item is that loss of 750 gold. So what I found from beating the game and from playing most of the missions, and many of them more than once, is that 750 gold is, it never becomes irrelevant, but it's also not that big of a deal. And oftentimes, especially for your main weapons, getting an extra +1 damage is a big deal. It enables you to beat harder scenarios and get more rewards faster, including better crafting ingredients, that I find that for at least the main weapons, it's worth it to make the level 1 version and not hold out for the level 2 version, unless it just, happens to fall into your lap. By contrast, the secondary weapons, armors, and accessories, those are not nearly as significant, and for those it is probably better to wait until the tier 2 version and make that. If you wait for the tier 3, you're going to be waiting for too damn long, because once you start looking at rare materials, those are in fact actually quite rare. And so I recommend for secondary armors and accessories, unless you just can't wait and want to make the worst one as soon as you possibly can, I recommend jumping to the second tier. Now, you get these crafting materials when you scrap items from your inventory, and when you get treasure chests as a reward for beating scenarios and for leveling up. The number of chests you get and the type of chests that you get is determined by which scenario you're playing and what difficulty you beat the scenario at. So being able to play later scenarios or being able to play early scenarios at higher difficulties, or both, enables you to get better crafting materials faster. And I do recommend as you play the game to figure out which materials are worth scrapping and which ones are worth keeping around. Like this wand of fireballs and potions of healing, those are pretty good, you should probably keep them around. But there are some like legendary items that are just not very good, and like those are definitely worth scrapping just to get some legendary crafting material, which would otherwise be incredibly difficult to come by. Okay, so let's talk about the daily powers and the utility powers, which behave in unpredictable and totally inconsistent ways when you upgrade them with items. I'm not actually starting a quest here, I'm just going to jump in to show you what some of the weirder interactions are. So our wizard has several daily powers that aren't just, damage and attack. One of them is sleep. And what I have found is that the crafted items do nothing. So if you're planning to use sleep as your daily power, you have absolutely no motivation whatsoever to give Ashara a secondary weapon to improve her daily powers. Same with Fire Shield. Fire Shield is, in my opinion, just the best daily power, and I honestly use it all the time. I really think it's just a mistake to use anything else, especially at higher difficulties. It deals 1 damage whenever Ashara gets hit by a monster, but this damage does not improve when you equip an item on her. So if you're going to use Fire Shield, which I recommend, you really should just not craft secondary weapons for Ashara, period. Now let's talk about the utilities. This is where things get really bizarre. So remember how accessories are different? So the designers chose to make it so that Ashara's accessory improves her utilities. Well, what I've found, and again, correct me if I'm wrong or if at higher levels something changes or whatever, haste and web do not get affected by the accessory at all. And in my opinion, these are the 2 powers that you should play with. I think that mage armor is just absolute garbage. While it does get affected, so if you have like a +2 accessory, you will give a +3 bonus to armor class, which is kind of significant. The problem is that this mage armor ability is so goddamn bad, it goes away if you ever get an attack roll of 17 or higher against you, which over the course of a scenario is not that unlikely to happen. Then your utility power did nothing. So it's a really bad power, and it's the only one that's affected by her accessories. So for Ashara, I think it's really bizarre, but the secondary weapons and the accessories are, at this moment, unless the game changes, completely not worth crafting, and you're better off, in my opinion, saving your crafting materials and using them for something else. Now, we also have a non-standard daily for the Paladin, which is this Crusader's Mantle. What this does is it makes it so that every hero, including Dragonbait, on his tile deals +1 damage until the end of his next turn. I have found that this is not affected at all. Again, it's possible that like maybe if you go to legendary one, there's some undocumented thing that will happen, but this damage does not scale with his secondary weapon, which is probably fine because that might be overpowered. But again, if this is the power that you're using, then it's not worth it for you at all to make secondary weapons for him. And let's talk also about his utilities, because those are a little bit weird. So heroism is affected. What it does is it adds a flat bonus to HP based on which accessory you crafted. So if you crafted the worst one, just the +1, it's going to be 20% to the target's max HP plus 1 more hit point. If you craft the +2, it's going to be 20% plus 2 hit points. Is that worth, 2,000 gold and a bunch of uncommon crafting materials? You decide. Personally, I think that that is very, very low on the priority scale. Last Stand, in my opinion, is a really bad power, but this does scale, obviously. Like, when I say obviously, I mean like it scales in the obvious way that you would expect. So with a +2 accessory, Dragon Bait regains 3 hit points. So that's cool. I don't use this power. I don't think it's very good. But if you do use it, then I guess you could consider making an accessory for Dragon Bait. And finally, we got Birdsong. Now, Birdsong's accessory doesn't improve his utility powers. However, Birdsong has some weird dailies. So Hypnotic Pattern, which stuns monsters on a tile for a turn, appears not to be affected. It doesn't like stun them for an extra turn or anything like that, which I think would have been cool, but alas, it does not. Song of Rest does get impacted, so it's 2 plus the bonus on the weapon. So if you have a +2 secondary weapon, then your allies can still only recharge 1 utility power. They don't get to recharge more utility powers, but they do regain 4 hit points, 2 plus 2, or whatever the bonus on the weapon is. So again, if you are playing and are using Hypnotic Pattern, then there's really no reason for the Bard to craft a secondary weapon. Okay, so folks, I hope that that sheds some light on the mysterious and completely inexplicable and inexplicably inconsistent crafting system used in this game, so that you can use your precious hard-earned money and materials in a way that makes sense and actually make actual decisions, as opposed to just throwing resources into the void and hoping that it does good stuff. If you have any questions or contradictions, please let me know in the comments below, and I'll do my best to either update this video with notes in the description if I've made any mistakes, or respond to your questions if I can answer questions that you've got. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Please like and or subscribe. Goodbye, everybody.